Okay, so we just wanted to do a little bit of a breakdown, analysis, and reaction to the Democratic debate that just wrapped up. Just watched it. CNN streamed it live on their website, so that's how we watched it. About the first maybe 35, 40 minutes of the debate were really just focused on the coronavirus pandemic and just so different questions around that. First question they asked about the coronavirus was how everyone will get treatment if you are Prez. Bernie talked about our dysfunctional healthcare system, how we have 87 million people who either have no insurance or underinsured in the richest country in the world, as well as how we spend more than 2 times as much as other countries on healthcare, how we spend, an exorbitant amount on prescription drugs, and then, that wasn't the first question, actually. The first question was actually to Joe Biden about the coronavirus, and he's talked about, we need to get drive-through testing, we need more hospital beds, we need to make sure people are getting paid when they're out of work, whether they're a small business owner or an employee. And Bernie just talked about how, Trump uses this very unfactual info about this whole process. And, now we know that Trump actually delayed testing on, this coronavirus pandemic because he was worried it would hurt his reelection chances. Bernie talked about how every patient or every person should have all payments covered both for the test and the treatment of coronavirus. Talked about kind of bringing the focus back to Medicare for All, how this would have been really helpful to have because we wouldn't have, people delaying getting medical care because they're concerned about how much it would cost because of their crappy insurance or because they don't have any insurance at all. Making sure how hospitals, have ventilators and the supplies that they need, and that, if you lose your job, you should be able to, you should be able to, get that money back, and how, Trump bailed out Wall Street to the tune of 1.5 trillion, how working people should have got that money instead. And then there was a question, did Trump, because Trump had been saying that supposed, red tape or, these bureaucratic conundrums hurt the response, as Trump had said. Biden said no. World Health Organization offered to help. And then this is one of the, Joe Biden actually had a pretty decent performance considering he was up there for 2 hours speaking and didn't just totally and completely have any type of serious brain fart. So kudos to Joe Biden and his team. I was actually kind of impressed he was able to do that. So during this answer, he confused coronavirus with the H1N1 or I believe that's the bird flu. So that was kind of one of his lackluster moments, if you will. And then there was a question about a national quarantine. Biden talked about convening experts in the Situation Room like they did when he was Obama's VP. And then this was one of the really just very disingenuous and just, completely stupid arguments that Joe Biden was trying to make. He was saying that single-payer healthcare didn't help Italy combat this problem when that obviously has... Oh my god, it's like... he's just so horrible on this issue. Joe Biden's healthcare plan leaves 10 million people 10 million people uninsured, and it's still going to result in people dying and people going bankrupt, and somehow he's trying to say that Medicare for All, a system where everybody is covered, it's free at the point of service, there's no deductibles, there's no co-payments, there's no premiums, so people will be able to go get the care that they need when they need it and not put it off due to a for-profit rapacious healthcare industry. He's saying that wouldn't help in these situations. That's obviously hugely disingenuous and just false. So that was...
Can I say something? Like how they said that they needed more hospital beds. I agree with that because they really do. Because we have a big homeless population here, and we see like homeless people everywhere and coughing. Um, when me and my grandma were gonna go walk down to go take a bus to the store down Fred Meyer, like this was a couple months ago, but there was this homeless lady that had no shoes, only clothes, and was sleeping on cardboard. We felt so sad, and we are like, maybe we should go like get her some shoes and stuff. But then when we got there, she wasn't there anymore. So I'm like, where did she go? And I'm just like worried about all of them because there's like so many here. And by the way, what we were just laughing at was our cat playing with the blinds.
And then, so Joe Biden was also talking about he would call out the military to help in some type of quarantine situation and how the military could build a bunch of hospital beds. And then, so Bernie's response is obviously much better. He was talking about, how are we going to get food to old folks, the vulnerable populations who aren't able to go out to the stores because, everybody's saying vulnerable population needs to self-isolate, quarantine. What are we going to do with the kids that are out of school right now? How are we going to help the parents who might not be working?
There you go.
How are we going to help the parents who might not be working because they're having to stay home with their kids right now? And then, even brought it back to people that are in prison and people that are homeless. How are we going to help, the most vulnerable and marginalized people and communities in the U.S. during this pandemic? So that's, really awesome. And then he just talked about how it's not a time for profiteering, Trump, ignoring this world health crisis. And let's see, then there was a question about the economy, how the Federal Reserve had just lowered interest rates to 0%. This question went to Biden. And talked about as a major bailout, we should be rewarding individuals right now, not corporations. We should be helping people pay their mortgages, rents paid. So, pretty decent response. Then Bernie talked about, the wealth and income inequality. Wealthy people will be fine, but how half of the U.S. lives paycheck to paycheck, the fragility of the economy for, vast majority of Americans, and, the problem of so few people have so much, and then the vast majority of us are just kind of trying to feast off the crumbs. And just look at how we got here. Biden said you gotta be solved with emergency needs right now, bring military along, think long term. And then Bernie says, you voted against the '08 bailouts, would you support them now? Stabilize the economy, tell working people you won't suffer. And then Biden was defending the Wall Street bailouts that he supported in, was it 2007, 2008, where again the financial institutions, these big Wall Street firms, these same people and companies that were responsible for the financial collapse, the financial meltdown, the Great Recession as it's called, were the same companies and individuals who were rewarded with, again, trillions of dollars in bailout money from our government, from we the people. Joe Biden was on stage defending that again. So I have no reservation saying that if he gets into office, he would support some of the same bailouts that Trump has just put into place. And then,
I'll be right back.
Okay, there was a question about how would undocumented folks be getting health care during this. Biden, said that they should make health care available to all undocumented people. There shouldn't be any issues around trying to deport people or anything if they go to seek medical care for this. But then he slipped up and he called, this is just, it's really sad, but he called undocumented folks aliens. It's like, oh, Jesus, Joe, that's horrible. They're human beings, they're people, they're undocumented folks. They're not aliens, they're actually human beings. And Bernie talked about ending the ICE raids. Obviously, a much better response than Joe Biden calling these undocumented people aliens. And then yeah, he did that. There was, sorry, I was looking over at my partner because she gave me a bit of a askance look. I was like, whoa, did Joe Biden say that? He actually did. And then there was a question to both of the candidates, how have they been protecting themselves due to this pandemic, this coronavirus pandemic? Bernie just talked about, how they had the fireside chat that he had last night, I believe, at his home in Burlington, Vermont, using a lot of soap and sanitizer, things like that. And, Biden, more or less the same. And then there was some talk about Biden was saying, how are you going to pass Medicare for All, Bernie, the cost of it, the 4 years to get it fully implemented. Let's heck now. And obviously, that's just a horrible argument for Biden to make because, as we've seen, Medicare for All saves $450 billion a year. That's billions with a B, or equivalent to about, I think it's 13% of the U.S.'s current healthcare costs would be saved by switching to a single payer Medicare for All type system. So obviously Biden's just lying through his teeth, and that's because he is propped up by the health insurance companies and pharmaceutical industries.
Probably through his fake teeth.
Well, they might be real. Bernie brought it back to the power structure in America and, the billionaires and the kind of owner class, how they have just this huge control of our political system, and kind of throwing some shade at Biden because I believe Biden has upwards of 40 or 50, maybe more, billionaires supporting his campaign. Bernie has 0. And just Bernie echoing the statement, making sure the economy works for everybody, wanting to take on Wall Street, the insurance companies. Biden talked about, his average contributions about $40. Bernie outspent me, but I won. And then Bernie was talking about, Joe, you should actually get rid of your super PACs. You've condemned them in the past, but you now support them now, and now you're being supported by these super PACs, and just how half the people in the U.S. shouldn't be struggling. And then this was a really good part. Bernie started to call out Joe Biden on his wanting to cut Social Security. Biden was lying, trying to say that he actually didn't support that, and then Bernie says, no, actually, to the people watching and listening to this, go look it up on YouTube. You can see for yourself Joe Biden advocating for wanting to cut Medicare, Social Security, veterans benefits, any governmental program multiple times as a senator. And it's kind of funny, actually, because I had made a video about Joe Biden advocating for those things, and then people looked it up. So I'm glad people were actually looking into that. I hope the older folks also took the time and looked at Joe Biden's horrible issues with regards to wanting to cut Social Security. And then the next question was about public college. It went to Joe Biden. What changed, Joe? You seem to support that now, at least up to a certain extent. And then Biden also talked about the bankruptcy bill. He was a huge supporter of that, and the bankruptcy bill basically made it impossible for people with student loan debt to be able to file bankruptcy for that. He was a big supporter of it. I think he helped wrote it, is what Bernie was saying. And Biden was just saying he didn't like it, but he improved it, so he had to support it, which is really stupid. And Bernie was just talking about, no, you have to actually have some courage, some ethics, and some morals to, stand up for these really important things and not just go along to get along like Joe Biden did on the bankruptcy bill. Talked about, how Bernie supported a living wage 4 years ago. Biden wrote the bankruptcy bill. And then Biden was trying to defend his support of the bankruptcy bill. It was like, no, actually, now I'm in the position to correct the same mistakes that I created when I supported this bill back in 2005. So it's like, that's just very clear. It shows who has the, really better judgment to stand up for policies that'll either hurt or benefit the working people. Joe Biden has been consistently clear on his voting record and things he's advocated for that detrimentally impact the working people compared to Bernie Sanders. He's always been on the right side of issues when it comes to helping and supporting the working class in the United States. And then this was really good. Bernie Sanders really laid into Joe Biden at this point in the debate for the just numerous horrible policies that Joe Biden has supported in the past. Defense of Marriage Act, Iraq War, NAFTA, which outsourced at least 1 million good paying jobs from the US, a majority of them high paying as well. PNTR with China, the bankruptcy bill, which we discussed, the Hyde Amendment, which prohibited, I believe, Medicaid funds being used for abortion services for low-income families. And then Biden tries to say that, Bernie voted against the Brady bill, which I believe had to do with some type of gun regulations or something like that. And then there was a question to Joe Biden: how will you appeal to Bernie's voters? By Bernie, I don't know. I didn't even write down Biden's response because it wasn't very good. And then Bernie, we can't deal with a lying, corrupt president in relation to Donald Trump. Hope to win. I will support, Biden if he defeats Trump, or to defeat Trump. And then Bernie just, really pointing it back to, needing to have the political courage to take on the greed of the fossil fuel industry and the health insurance companies, things like that. And then there was a question from a voter in Arizona. Let's see, best cabinet for women, for financial and physical health. Bernie talked about how half of his cabinet would be comprised of women because they make up half of the U.S. population. He's always been pro-choice, having different provisions to deal with domestic violence. This was really good, can't have women earning 80 cents on the dollar compared to men, and that's even less if you are a woman of color. And also talked about free universal childcare and pre-K. Biden talked about how he would appoint the first black woman to the, I believe, Supreme Court. He would make a woman his vice president. He wrote the domestic violence law. He talked about how you can't own a gun if you abused a woman. And then Bernie went back and hit Biden again on voting for the Hyde Amendment. Biden said, well, it's not my view anymore, but I did support it a while ago. And then Bernie just points it back, like, I've been consistent on this issue. Joe Biden has had a track record of not being on the right side of history on, things like the Hyde Amendment, the Iraq War, NAFTA, bankruptcy bill, PNTR, all of these things. And then one of the moderators kind of went at Joe Biden, or I should say Bernie Sanders. So would you commit right now to, promising to appoint a woman as your VP? And Bernie said, I'm, leaning strongly in that direction, but what matters most to me is appointing a progressive to that position, whether they be a woman or a man, which I think was a great response. You shouldn't just, tokenize these different cabinet positions, whether it's VP or whatever. It should be the best person to fill that role, if it's a man or a woman or whatever else. Then the questions turned to immigration. First went to Biden. How are we going to trust you not to deport millions of people again, as what happened under President Obama's administration when you were vice president? And he talked about DACA, access to citizenship, no one deported in the first 100 days, only felons getting deported. And then Bernie talked about how Obama voted with him on the immigration bill, restoring DACA, ending the ICE raids, no federal agents, grabbing babies from their families, ending the separation policy. And Bernie also,
Can I say something?
yes.
What side are you on right now?
What do you mean?
For what they're saying.
Bernie's.
Okay. Do you agree what some of the other person's saying?
Joe Biden?
Mm-hmm.
I agree with some of what he's saying, yes, but I just think with Joe Biden, he's willing to say or do anything that he thinks will help get him elected, while I think whenever Bernie Sanders is talking about something, it's something that he actually believes in deep down and will actually fight for. I just don't trust Joe Biden on any of these issues.
Okay, I agree with him. And dinner's already, so bye, guys. He'll finish this up. Bye.
Thank you. And then the question is like, so do you guys, people are going to say, Trump will say that both of you just want open borders. How do you respond to that? Bernie said, that's not what we want. We just want a humane and sensible border policy. Trump lies. These, migrants, whether they be documented, undocumented, or otherwise, are, really hard-working people. They're living in terror under the Trump administration from these ICE raids and the family separation and these deportations and all these, horrible things happening. And Bernie talked about how we need more administration judges at the border to help facilitate asylum seekers, refugees, migrants, ending the family separation, ending the demonization of the immigrant community, bringing people together, which was really awesome. And then they asked Biden, you were opposed to sanctuary cities back in 2007. Are you opposed to them now? Biden just answered no. One-word answer. Bernie said no. Obviously, end ICE raids day one. Country, which is really interesting. Bernie pointed out how the U.S. was built on slave labor, which is obviously true. Biden talked about investing in migrant communities. Let's see, and then there were some questions around climate change and infectious diseases, specific measures around that. Bernie talked about, we have severe droughts, extreme weather due to climate change. We got to transform our energy system, get rid of fracking, these absurd subsidies that we have for the fossil fuel corporations, get rid of those. Biden talked about how islands are sinking, people getting ill from climate change, beetle infestations in the Northeast. And then Jake Tapper address this question to Joe Biden because his climate change plan only allocates it's like 1.7 trillion to fight and address climate change. So Tapper's question to Biden was, is your plan ambitious enough given the scale of the problem? Joe Biden says yes. Go to my website. We got light rail, 500,000 charging stations for electric cars. We joined the Paris Climate Accord. 20 billion to help save the Amazon rainforest. And Bernie says, nope, it's not enough, Joe. And Biden says, no more drilling on federal lands. Bernie pointed out how, scientists now are saying that they've actually, underestimated the problem. So we actually, need to take this very, very seriously and devote as much resources to this issue as we can, because as Bernie always points out, it is an existential crisis. We can't live on an uninhabitable planet. We need to be able to breathe the air, drink the water. We need to have healthy soil and ecosystems, all of that. And how Bernie was just talking about how we need to bring the world together to fight this issue, because again, it affects everybody. No matter where you live in the world, you're going to be affected by climate change, whether you like it or not. Biden talked about how he would support any new fracking. We, again, focus on the high-speed rail, no more drilling on federal lands. And then Tapper asked Bernie, how are we going to transition without fracking? And Bernie is basically saying, what's the alternative if we don't take it seriously? And obviously, you take that to its logical conclusion. The alternative is the human species isn't going to be on the Earth very much longer. So yeah, I think we can get rid of fracking, Jake Tapper, and we'll be okay. Jesus Christ. And then Bernie just pointed out how through adopting, a Green New Deal, we'd be able to put millions of people to work in these good-paying union jobs through this massive investment in this stuff that we really need. And then one of the moderators, I forget their name, had a question for Bernie about Castro. How are you going to speak to the voters, I think Cuban American voters in particular in Florida, that you've been praising certain aspects of Fidel Castro's regime in Cuba, and obviously that whole line of questioning is just framed in such a ridiculous way. But Bernie gave a pretty good response. So he said he's opposed authoritarianism all over the world. We're in a global crisis right now. We need to move towards democracy and human rights. And then Biden says, well, Cuba's been a dictatorship for decades. Bernie says, I condemned authoritarianism, but, even in supposed authoritarian countries, there are still positive things that they do. Those things can be true at the same time. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. And then one of the questions towards Biden was like, well, Obama actually came out and praised some of the aspects of the Castro regime in Cuba. I think maybe it was back in 2016 or something like that. How is Bernie, praising certain aspects of Cuba under Castro? How is that any different? And Biden was saying, well, it's obviously a lie. Obama was just trying to get them to change the policy by getting them to, or by saying these positive things about them. China's a dictatorship. Bernie's praised USSR and Cuba in the past. And then Bernie is like, Joe, did China reduce extreme poverty? And then because they obviously did, and then just pointing out how Obama was more generous than Bernie in the praise that he provided to Cuba under Castro. And then question about the Iraq War, so getting into a little bit more foreign policy now. And Biden was trying to defend it, saying that he voted for it because he thought he trusted George W. Bush, and he believed that George W. Bush wouldn't use force in that, but how he was wrong to trust him, which is like, does not speak well of your